Hello, I'm Dr. Torna Pitman from Engender Equality, a Tasmanian statewide family violence service. Welcome to the final video in the series of 10 videos on coercive control. I can't believe we've actually got to number 10. There's been a lot of contact and content and a lot of journey to go through to get to this stage. So transformation, healing and recovery is the topic for today. It's a lot more straightforward when we feel safe and when we have no need for contact with the coercive controller. For those people who are subjected to post-separation pattern of coercive control from their coercive controller, the situation is far more complex, as well as reliant on good social and legal support. And that doesn't always happen, and that can complicate the healing process. So the victims of coercive control, if they're unable to extricate themselves from the coercive controller post-separation because of things like shared parenting arrangements, or the fact that they're continually being stalked, harassed, retaliated against, defamed, and just having their lives intruded upon by the coercive controller. When that happens, the healing requires more help. It's harder to do on your own, but it is still possible. It's possible by putting boundaries around the coercive controller, engaging as much social and legal support as possible, and to really understand what's required to keep yourself safe. So don't lose too much heart if you are one of those people who are in shared parenting arrangements with your coercive controller. There are still ways to heal. So stay tuned for an exploration of transforming, healing and recovery from coercive control. Welcome back. So I have a video, PowerPoint for you for this video on transformation, healing and recovery. And to show where we've been, we've already covered an introduction to coercive control, the dynamics, part 1 and 2, the tactics, the styles, the effects, the stages, the children, the post-separation consequences and challenges, and today, transformation, healing and recovery from coercive control. So it's quite a journey. Now, there's some main points I would like you to understand that underlie the healing process from coercive control. Healing works far better when we know exactly what caused our wounds and what our wounds actually are, so that we know exactly what we are healing from. The less confusion we have, the more healing we can engage in. Healing is a decision. We make a decision to heal rather than suffer and analyze and go round and round in circles trying to work out why it happened. Healing is really a decision, and it's also a cycle. It's not linear. It goes around in different cycles. There are good parts, there are difficult parts, there are more neutral parts, and the cycle can continue for years, but it gets easier and better and better. And it can fully begin when we give up hope of the relationship ever working with a coercive controller. That is when a lot of our clients tell us that they started to heal, because they gave up the hope that it might change, the relationship might get better, he might suddenly understand what he was doing, he might suddenly apologize and actually make amends. When you give up that hope, healing can start. We're not alone in healing. We're not weird and we're not different. It's just a specific type of healing. Healing from the wounds of coercive control is similar to the wounds we perpetrate on the original inhabitants of a country when we take it over against the will of and at the expense of the people. So when we're healing from coercive control, we link into healing from people who have been colonized, enslaved, taken hostage, oppressed, marginalized, and abused in all different ways. We actually are in that same community of healing from having been oppressed, and the specific way that you've been oppressed is by coercive control. There's nothing wrong with us. There are many victims of coercive control, and everyone needs to heal from something in this world. The world is unequal and it's unfair just as much as it is beautiful. So people can suffer through no fault of their own. It was not their thinking that was the problem. It was what was done to them. It was not their mindset that was wrong. It was not having the freedom or the support that they needed to free themselves. Slaves, for example, did not attract nor have the mindset that created their enslavement. It was done to them. So we need to be careful about what kinds of platitudes we listen to when people try to tell us that we need to think more positively and change our mindset and create a better life for ourselves. We do need to understand what happened to us and that there are ways to get past it. So please stay away from people or groups who are immature and superficial. They may use psychobabble or whitewash our stories with positive thinking and inauthentic platitudes or dismissive comments re our experience. We are all very vulnerable to being hurt by people who talk to us like this when we are healing. So healing after coercive control is an internal process from our responses to the coercive control, and it's also an external process because we have to heal the consequences of coercive control in our lives. For example, to our finances, to our social network, to our sexual identity, to all those consequences from the coercive control that also need to be addressed. It's a very big process. It's internal and it's external. So one of the first things we have to do for a healing strategy is to learn about trauma. It's essential we understand trauma because coercive control is traumatizing. We won't all be all traumatized to the same degree or in the same way, but coercive control is a very traumatizing process. Learn about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. What happens when we're under threat and how to stay in our window of tolerance. They are really important pieces of our knowledge, and knowledge is power. So when someone threatens us in a relationship, such as our coercive controller, our bodies will go into either a fight, a flight, a freeze, or a fawn response. And sometimes those trauma responses get trapped and locked in our bodies, and they need to be addressed. And there are trauma therapies, and there are trauma-informed counsellors, and even a good support person can help us to deal with the trauma that we've actually gone through and how it's affected our nervous system, our cognitive thinking, and our sense of ourself. Secondly, learn your rights in any relationship. You have rights. You have conversational rights, you have sexual rights, you have economic rights, you have social rights, you have physical rights, you have every kind of right. And you also have the right to be represented accurately and fairly. It's an unacceptable burden of inequality that you are bearing socially, financially, psychologically, and for your health and well-being when you are being coercively controlled. So understand your rights. And then Recognize when someone is using conversational control on you, when they're controlling the conversation to their benefit and not letting you have equal say, when they're using verbal abuse or emotional abuse towards you, and learn how to respond. We all have trouble with this, as our societal role modeling has been so poor that clearing up confusion is the antidote to that. So learn to recognize, learn how to respond, and clear up our confusion. Talking over a person who understands domestic violence and coercive control can be very helpful for that process. It's also critical to look at our physical well-being. So use movement, nurturing, connecting, and mindful activities. Remember to eat well and to exercise. Look after yourself. Use self-care. Take time out. Take time in nature. Exercise. Remember that you really also need to sleep well. Those basics, when we actually cover those basics and we hydrate ourselves and we look after every aspect of our health, that sets a very good foundation. And a lot of people, when they're healing from coercive control, forget to do those things because they're so busy surviving and trying to come to terms with what happened. When we do look after that side of our life, we start to heal much quicker. Prioritize yourself, your needs, and your safety on all levels. We all need life buoys, and who and what will be your life buoys? When you think about being in relationship with a coercive controller, there's no way you could prioritize yourself or your needs. Your safety was not of concern to the coercive controller, nor were your needs. So to actually start to prioritize those is a really healing thing to do post-separation. Understand and learn about grief and loss. We all need to recognize and grieve our losses at your own pace and in the order that makes sense to you. Share your grief because it's a collective grief as well as an individual grief. Grief includes very strong emotions like anger and rage, so learn to expect strong emotions and how to process them safely. And you might want to do that in counselling or with a safe person. But when you think about the relationship that you thought you were going to have with your coercive controller and the relationship you ended up happening, and the difference between the two, that is the enormity of the grief and loss from that relationship, and a sense of relationship betrayal, of being betrayed and undermined and tricked. So there's a lot of different layers to grief from coercive control. Find some daily wisdom. For example, Lundy Bancroft's book, Daily Wisdom, Encouragement for Women Involved with Angry and Controlling Men, is excellent. It's really helpful. It has a page for every day that is just full of wisdom about how to extricate yourself from the control over your thinking and your feeling and your sense of yourself from coercive control. So stay away, Lundy says, from what we want to stop, change or fix, and move more towards what you want to aim for instead. So for example, instead of saying, I need to conquer my fears, so that's what you want to fix. I want to conquer my fears. Change it to, I want to have safe and healthy relationships. Because when you do conquer your fear, what is it that you'll end up having? The ability to have safe and healthy relationships. Now, Lundy Bancroft also suggests make a plan for 1 month, 1 year, and 5 years. Set your sights on what you want in your life, who will be in it, and what you want to do with your life. Having goals moves us towards living from choice. We gain clarity about who we are, what we want for ourselves and our world, and we can align ourselves with our deepest selves. It also gives us a sense of mission. It's a much better idea to plan forward rather than to constantly dwell and analyze on the past beyond a certain point. At least we all need to be doing both. We need to be planning forward as well as unpacking the past. Remember, there is nothing wrong with you. You just need to heal. You are more the norm than different. Coercive control is rampant. Around the world, it is utterly rampant. And so is any kind of systematic disempowering and blaming process of people. And as has already been discussed, that happens between groups, it happens between countries, it happens in all areas of life, a sort of a marginalising, systematically disempowering process, and at the same time as blaming those very same people for their reactions to that. Many people haven't recognised that when they're grieving, they really are joining almost a collective. And they don't need to feel ashamed or different or damaged or unable to function because they were coercively controlled. They didn't let themselves be coercively controlled. They couldn't have stopped it. And the only way to prevent it in the future is to know what coercive control is, what you can do about it, and to have the social and legal backup. This is a very important one. Take your identity back into your own hands through the process of healing. Your identity will expand and evolve. It won't just remain small and under the influence of your coercive controller, because you think about it, your coercive controller has been telling you who and what you are, and what you should and shouldn't be, and what you should be doing and not doing. For example, the entire relationship, it affects your identity. Some women describe it as ending up being a cardboard cutout of who they are. And it will affect different genders differently because of identity issues. But in the main, you will become wiser, more mature, and more self-affirming when you start taking your identity back. There are mountains and valleys to healing. There are the ups and the downs, and you can lose sight of the wisdom that you're gaining and the identity that you're getting back when you're down in that valley. So keep a journal, give yourself a chance, and it's easier to travel this road, much easier to do the healing than it is to keep assuming the shape that the coercive controller wants to try and keep you in. Healing is expanding. Living with a coercive controller is contracting. So expanding can hurt and take a bit of, feel a bit unpleasant and quite bad at times, really, but you are at least expanding, always expanding. Stay away from people who extort, hook, and beckon you with platitudes, new age psychobabble, and positive thinking. There's nothing wrong with positive thinking. It's just the overuse of it so that your experience, your story is whitewashed or minimized or reduced to a platitude of some kind, and you're just told to, you just really need to change your mindset and think more positively. The overuse of that can also feel abusive. Stay away from gurus, especially those gurus making money. They are often emotionally abusive. They don't use a sociological lens, and nor do they understand oppression and how people are disempowered and blamed. They don't understand the systematic, relentless abuse of you and coercive control and the undermining of you. So to listen to their words puts you at risk of just feeling shamed, blamed, and bad about yourself again. The world needs to heal, not just you. This is not an individual problem. When you're in grief and transition, we are all vulnerable to being drawn into cult-like thinking and activities which take you away from healing and towards just another form of coercive control. And remember, coercive control has similarities to cult-like practices that keep people under the thumb, if you like, and thinking the cult way, or they're told there's something wrong with them. So be careful of that. You didn't attract what happened to you. You just didn't recognize it until it was too late. And it's a bit like the insect in the spider's web. The insect didn't even realize that what the web was. Once it's in, it's in. And the spider had spread the web as far as it could between 2 points in order to trap. And we are all susceptible to being trapped. Learn about inequality and boundaries. What will you allow now and what won't you allow in your life? Not only do you need to decolonize your mind from disempowerment and blame, the coercive controller needs to decolonize their mind as well so that they don't behave like a colonizer. So it's not only you that needs to be doing the work, but whatever you do, don't get drawn into trying to heal your coercive controller, even if they show signs of taking great strides towards that, because you need that energy for yourself and to restore your life. And your coercive controller is far better off to look out for their own growth and to get their own support without trying to drag you into it in order to keep you in their life. So that can be a very hard one for the clients that we see, where they feel, oh, well, I still care and I'm a bit worried about them, and, you know, they had a bad childhood and they had something else that, you know, makes them a bit vulnerable, and our clients know their coercive controllers' vulnerable spots. But for you to pay too much attention to that and not enough attention to yourself, you're undermining yourself yet again by doing that. So know your bottom lines and know how you want to be communicated with. Set your boundaries, know your rights, and this means learning how to say no. And this means learning how to deal with your coercive controllers or other people's disappointment or distress or disapproval or disgust at you not being very catering or very submitting. And that is a really important process in itself. And that sometimes requires the help of someone else just to help, you know, guide you through that. Now, in a relationship with a coercive controller, you'll be colonized in many ways. In every area of the relationship, there'll be a colonizing process going on. In the financial relationship, the social relationship, in the conversations, in the physical relationship, and, of course, in the sexual relationship. Now, being sexually colonized allows women in particular no sense of their own sexual identity, wants, or needs, because they have to cater to those of their partner. So paying attention to the double standards, double binds, and violations of their own needs, wants, and boundaries in their sexual relationship helps to see the impact and the renegotiation of your sexual self-sovereignty or your self-government, your control over your sexual life. The coercive controller doesn't allow you to have control over your own sexual life. They control the sexual life, not you. So coercive controllers are actually fraudulent sexual partners because you didn't give informed consent to being treated that way. You hoped for a very different kind of a sexual relationship, and the one that you ended up getting was not what you were wanting. And when you think about how many double standards there were in that relationship and how many double binds and how many ways your boundaries were violated, that may not have included extreme forms of sexual abuse such as rape or assault, but nonetheless they would have been violating your boundaries. So that's an important one, particularly for women, to really come to terms with in their healing, is how they were sexually colonized. Being colonized is a really deep process, and it goes beyond individual circumstances, stress levels, personalities, strengths and weaknesses, or family of origin issues. So explore how it felt to be colonized, to be owned, to be taken over, what it meant in every area of your life, and acknowledge that it takes time to extract yourself from this process, and attempts to please or placate or try to get some agreement or support or permission or approval from your coercive controller. And that when you know you are really starting to heal, when you no longer seek their agreement, their support, their permission or their approval, you don't want it and you don't need it. And that's a fantastic sign, because the coercive controller works very hard to make sure that that's always something you're striving for. And when you stop seeking it, you're not even interested in it, and you have no desire to please them at all, then you're making amazing headways. So please avoid spending too much time trying to make sense of your coercive controller, because when you concentrate on the individual incidents, or what he said, or why did he say that, or why did he do that, or how come he did that then, and what's the deeper meaning of that, you really waste your time. You're trying to analyze the spider's web, and you know the spider's web. The spider's web is really all about the attitudinal style. I'm superior, I'm entitled, and I have a adversarial attitudinal style. So everything that I do in the relationship stems from that, and any tactics that I use to control you, any things that I say, any actions that I put out there are my attempts to keep you in a state of either fear, obligation, guilt or shame, confusion, so that you're much more convenient and amenable to me. They're irrational, they're contradictory actions. What he says can be irrational. A coercive controller doesn't always add up. They don't have a deep core. It's very superficial and it's very shallow. And so you can probably analyze it quite quickly and then be done with it, and spend more time on working out what you want in your life and following the other healing strategies. It's really also critical to decolonize your mind, which is sort of related to not analyzing the coercive controller too much, because you're still giving them energy. You're still focusing on them. They quite like that. So when you decolonize your mind, you're taking it back from the coercive controller. They told you who or what you were or weren't or should be or shouldn't be, or what you should be doing or what not to do, or what not to think, or what to think or how to feel, etc. Now, make it a practice to decide for yourself. Seek daily wisdom from yourself. You have an enormous pot of wisdom inside of you that you've been told all through the relationship that you don't have, but you do have an enormous amount of wisdom. And you need to seek your own wisdom all the time. It's okay to also seek it from other people, but be careful from whom you seek it from. But please seek your own wisdom. Be your own guru. Make your own decisions about who you are. Now, sometimes that can get tricky and hard, and we need to talk things over with people, but it's just that that's what we aim for, to decolonize our mind and take back our own wisdom as to who we are, and what we should be doing, and what we want to do, and what we're aiming for in life. We no longer have to assume the shape that the coercive controller wanted us to take. Be careful not to isolate yourself. You really need safe connection. It's so important to your healing to stay connected, to make efforts to join a group, a sport, a hobby, anything which keeps you connected. We are all very vulnerable to being further exploited when we are not connected, and if we don't have a sense of belonging or being loved by someone somewhere. So connection, the same as confusion, really starts you off on the healing journey. It's much worse for those people who are lonely and isolated and unable to reach out or talk things over with anyone. That is not a good thing. So one of the things that in gender equality are trying to do is to reach people who don't have anyone that they can really safely reach out to and talk to and connect with. So remember, there's nothing wrong with you. You just need to heal. So do the children. You are linked to all the other people healing from being systematically disempowered and blamed. There is intergenerational healing necessary, as well as the healing of a society and a political structure that has allowed coercive control and such extraordinary inequality to not only happen, but to continue. Alone, it is impossible to create equality. This requires change at systemic, societal, legal, and political level. So sometimes it can be helpful to join something that is creating change, that is working towards equality, because that's what was denied you. So when you start working towards that, then it really aids in your healing process. Please be prepared for the coercive controller to turn the tables on you, to try to turn the tables on you, and lie, twist, and confound the truth without any trouble so that they look like they're the victim and you're the perpetrator. You need to plan for this, and you need to have strategies to counter it. And it can be very useful to talk that over with somebody, because then coercive controller wants to win and be right, and the cards that they will play will be to turn the tables and make out that you're the one with the problem and that you are lying. And I was just noticing that there's been a lot written about the mental institutions in Tasmania, where it was mainly men who signed their wives or female relatives in for being annoying in some way, or so that they could gain their property, or because they wanted a mistress or wanted to marry their mistress. And women would be consigned to the mental asylum for the rest of their life, and they would never come out again. So what I'm saying there is that coercive controllers don't have any compunction in controlling you. So you've got to be prepared of what they will do when you try to extricate yourself, or when you have extricated yourself and you stand up to them in any way. They will turn the tables on you, and not only just to you, but defame you to other people. So rather than being knocked around by that, or really so shocked that you're almost unable to function, it's best to be planning for it, preparing for it, and strategizing for it. Understand the trap you are in and refuse to entertain the justifications and tactics by the coercive controller to turn the tables on you. If you have children, this will be an ongoing issue that you will need help for. And this is where particularly women and children get into very tricky situations where the coercive controller is hell-bent on describing the mother as unfit and that the children have been alienated from them. So there has to be preparation for that and planning and strategies to counter that. Learn about post-traumatic growth. Healing brings newfound strength and wisdom, improved relationships, spiritual changes. Just as you thought you were doomed to live a sad, lonely, limited life, no way. Post-traumatic growth is really possible. Remember the valleys and the mountains. It is part of every healing process, no matter what we are healing from. There are the ups and the downs. But overall, there is often post-traumatic growth happening. Coming up is a video that explains this concept to you further.
Can a client emerge from a tragedy at a higher level of happiness than they experienced before? Dr. Sonia Lubomirsky, a psychology professor and researcher, has studied this phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth. Sonia reveals why this happens, but not only that, she shares new perspectives on how to foster it.
So imagine that someone had a bad event, like whether it's a diagnosis or losing a job, losing a spouse. And for some people, they're like this in happiness, they go down and they never recover. And that's actually a pretty small subset. Other people, they go down in their happiness and then they go back up to the same level. And that's the majority. And so a lot of resilience research is on that. And that's literally what resilience is. You bounce back. So you bounce to the same level you were before. But what I think is the most fascinating are people who are kind of going down, and then when they come back up, they actually come to a higher level than they were before. And that's called post-traumatic growth. Not to say that we should all experience trauma so we could experience that, but if you have experienced it, some people just are able to, they grow, they appreciate their life more, they feel like life is so precious. I didn't really appreciate that before. They kind of live day to day. But, and what's interesting to me are the individual differences. What makes that person special that see it that way? And actually, my very, at the beginning, when I first started doing research on happiness, back when I was in grad school, my advisor back then, and he had this friend, talked about this. He had a friend who was a Holocaust survivor. Well, actually, two different people he knew who were Holocaust survivors. And one of them said, it's indecent or obscene to ever be happy again after the Holocaust. Like after that happened, how can anyone be happy again? And the other person said, it's insane or indecent to be unhappy again. Like how can you not enjoy life, regular life, after you've survived the concentration camp? So it's just it kind of puts into this stark contrast, this very different perspective that some people have. Fortunately, most people have the more positive perspective. And they grow. And so anyway, that's what's most interesting to me about resilience. There's also some research that shows sort of how people can become more resilient. Laura King, who's at Missouri, she does research on meaning. And so she finds, for example, that, some people make this distinction between happiness and meaning. Like, you could be happy or you can have meaning. And I've always thought that they really go together. It feels good when you feel like you have meaning in your life. And so that's exactly what she finds. She actually did this really great study where she measured people throughout the day. And she asked people, how happy do you feel? And how much meaning do you feel right now? And on days that you felt happier, you felt you had more meaning. And on days you had more meaning, you felt happier. So they kind of cause each other. And lots of others. She also studies coping. And she finds, for example, getting back to coping, that when people experience negative events or like real major adversity, they not only that they actually can become happier, they become more mature. And so she, for example, has studied women who have kids with Down syndrome, and sort of she studied their life stories and how they describe, when they first found out, and basically she finds that most of them have become kind of more mature through that experience, more kind of cognitively complex. It's like they think about life in a more complex way. She also looked at, so she looked at different groups, women who got divorced after many, many years. So older women who are divorced after like very long marriages, suddenly their identity has changed and how they've coped with that. And she also studied gays and lesbians who've come out and how, the hard parts of that. So anyway, so she finds that people not only get happier after some of these very difficult events, but they become more mature.
When major adversity hits, it can recalibrate a person's perspective in ways that they may never have imagined.
Which is good to know, because there is hope for healing, even if healing feels really bad and difficult and hard and lonely. I think the post-traumatic growth is really important and hopeful because it's often not understood that, and it certainly doesn't feel like that when you're trying to heal. It feels like you're just going around in circles and you're lost and it should never have happened anyway, and there's a lot of sadness and depression as part of the grief and loss and the healing. And you can really lose sight of the fact that through that process, you're growing, you're changing, you're developing, there's more parts of you available, and over time, people will start to see you as quite different as well, and so will your children. So whenever the process feels really bleak and sad and you feel lost and lonely, just think about, the option of post-traumatic growth. And remember, your responses to coercive control may have included depression, anxiety, and a reduction in your mental health, but this is normal. You're not a robot. Your coercive controller would have blamed you for your reactions and maybe try to make you appear like an unfit mother or someone that needs to be put into a mental asylum. It would seem more appropriate for everybody to look at the coercive controller and the mindset that enabled them to control your life as if you had no rights to control your own. Honor your need for help and strategies to heal your mental health. So Lundy Bancroft has written the book, The Joyous Recovery, A New Approach to Healing and Wellness. And in this, he focuses on addictions. Now, it's not often talked about that when someone's been subjected to coercive control, it's really easy to form an addiction of some kind or other. And really, most of the world has an addiction of some kind or another, either a substance or a behavior. So it's nothing to be ashamed about. It's more to understand. So addictions are pain medications for feelings that are too hard to handle. So what is addictive is the promise of pleasure and the illusion of pleasure, which has great power to chase other feelings away and to mask pain. We all have them in some shape or form. They're really common. And they create numbness in us. And it's nice to feel numb. And we keep harming that part of us, though, that's numb, because we lack sensation. And it means that we make mistakes and we don't realize that we're making them. And there's an addictive loop. Addictive behaviors mask pain in the short term, but they cause more pain in the long term. And that in itself creates addiction, because we need to up our addiction in order to deal with the increased chaos and drama that we're creating. The lower grade addictions we use to chase away pain or emptiness are generally shopping, home improvements, social media, web surfing, constant drama, unhealthful eating, risk-taking or self-harming behaviour, superficial sex, pornography, constant internal chatter, mental loops, obsessions, compulsions, alcohol, drugs, caffeine, nicotine, and sweets. So there's some of the more common ones. The first step to breaking free of addictive behaviours is to pay really close attention to your own feelings, both during and after the afterlife experiences, because that's often what we're not wanting to know. And begin to notice what brings you genuine, lasting pleasure, and when do we use an addiction to try and numb the pain. The sense of loss from giving up something important is an illusion, because we start to think of our addictions as friends. A lot of people say when they are told they really have to give up smoking, that they feel like they're losing a friend. Their smoking has become a friend and a companion. But it's an illusion, really, because we're also extremely delighted when the addiction is gone. We can confuse numbness from pain as pleasure. So when we stop our pain by numbing it, we feel really good. and then we think that that's pleasure, but it's not real pleasure. We just confuse the two. And it's about becoming really clear on the difference between numbing our pain and actually feeling real pleasure as opposed to numbing pain. And addictions cause an increase in pain and emptiness. So we get lost in an ever-present cycle, oscillating between pain and emptiness and numbness. Addiction behaviors interfere with our healing. So pay close attention to your own feelings, both before, during, and after life experiences. Often we use addictions so we don't have to notice those or feel them. And as we're healing, we become much more able to tolerate uncomfortable feelings. We don't run from them so much. We don't like them. We don't want them. But we can tolerate them and we can understand them as part of being human, and that there's nothing wrong with us for having them. People who don't feel don't actually grow. And it's funny because alcoholics, when they're in a particular state, can cry and cry and cry and cry, but it doesn't go anywhere. They're not feeling their feelings as such. It's coming from a completely different space. To feel our feelings, we really do need to be free of an addiction and free of numbing ourselves, and actually allow ourselves to feel those feelings. And we also need to increase our internal awareness and find people and structured one-on-one or group support that you trust, with whom you can break the silence regarding your addiction and maybe get to some of the feelings that you have. But more importantly, ways out of your distress. That can be very tricky to do on your own. And again, there are people who are very skilled at that kind of counselling, that can help you go from numbing your pain to feeling and understanding your pain and moving on from it, so that you can experience post-traumatic growth rather than living in a very, much smaller shape than within what you're really meant to be. And addictions thrive on secrecy and shame, as does coercive control. So tell the truth. We need to tell the truth more about our lives and about the addictions we use to numb ourselves and what happened to us so that we needed to numb ourselves in the first place. It's not so that we can wallow in it. It's so that we can just tell the truth. And it stops us from feeling shamed and isolated and secret, but more connected, and to have a chance to grow. It'll also help you work out when your addictive behaviour started up, and work out what you want and need to add to your life as you grieve the loss of the addiction. So working with addictions means working out what's missing from your life and what do you need to add into it. What is it that needs to come in? What do you want and need that would make your life feel rich and fulfilling without the same need to numb? We would all heal much more quickly if a societal and legal process required from the coercive controller a full admission and apology of all harms made, and a legal contract to make amends to those harmed. Now, even better, that an unequal, coercive, colonizing relationship is actually illegal. How good would it be if a coercive controller was held accountable and required to admit the way that they controlled, every part of it, apologise for it and make amends for it? And we knew that the children would be safe from them, and that the coercive controller would undertake, either a parenting course or monitored parenting, where they were actually supervised properly to make sure that they had the capacity to parent, and also to keep the children safe, because coercive controllers can be very, very poor parents. They don't have the capacity to understand children's needs. Now, if that was to happen, healing wouldn't be so difficult. it took white Australia far too long to apologise to the actual and original owners of this land, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. They had to wait so long to be apologised to have a full admission made, and a contract to make amends. And even then, you know, that needs to be adhered to and evolved and fully understood by everybody so that healing can actually take place. It's only possible in a society that is morally and ethically fast asleep for it to be so difficult, particularly for women and children, to be free of coercive control and its consequences. And the same for the original owners of this land. We must have been morally and ethically fast asleep to do what we did to the original and actual owners of this land. Post-separation, children rely on adults for age-appropriate help regarding a coercively controlling parent. They need to know their rights as a child, what respectful communication and parenting is, what equal relationships look like, and what abuse is. Now, parents often worry about what to say to children and how to, you know, protect them from the coercive control that's been going on. But in an age-appropriate manner, children do need that education. And they need to know what to do if they feel abused, who to turn to, and that it is not their fault. Education is really critical, as well as being allowed to have complex and really contradictory emotions for the coercive controller. So children will often love and hate them. They often dying to be with them and then too scared to be with them. They've got contradictions and complexities that are quite understandable given the way that the coercive controller has parented them. And the parent, the non-offending parent, is not necessarily alienating the child from the father at all. They're actually, the father has actually set up the relationship themselves for how they treated the children. So we really need to take it back to the coercive controller and educating everybody, including children, on what coercive control is and what's an equal relationship and what are the child's rights and what to do if they're feeling abused. That's critical. And I can't tell you how many clients have told me that they wished they'd known that as a child because they were forced into post-separation shared parenting arrangements with their coercive controller parent, and it wrecked their lives on many levels, and it wasn't what they wanted. And the abuse that they'd experienced before the breakup continued after the breakup. And they wished that they'd understood and had more rights and had been helped with what was going on rather than to be left to it. So post-separation, unless we identify parents who are coercive controllers, and statistically this will be the father, then carefully assess and monitor their capacity for parenting, given their capacity for abuse, control and violence. If we don't do that, we put children at risk. And as a society, we will look back at this failing in the same way that we now have a Me Too movement that we can look back on and see what's been happening and kept quiet and under wraps and under the radar for years and years and years and, you know, decades. And same as we now understand the calculated sexual abuse of children in church-run institutions, we're starting to reveal the different kinds of oppressions that are going on in our world and starting to make sense of them, and people starting to speak up and speak out. And it won't be long before women and children will start to speak out particularly women and children, but not only women and children, will start to speak out about what's happened for them in coercive control and what happened to them post-separation when they weren't looked after by the legal processes and they were made to handle it on their own.
The many things we've talked about, this is one of those that gets me a bit enraged. The structures we have that don't always protect children, and when I see what exposure of any form of abuse does to a child, whether it happens once or it happens year over year over year, there is a rage that bubbles up in me. I see amazing people who have no idea of their gifts and all their goodness, because as a little child, the world was turned into this dangerous, dangerous place. It is those spaces, that to me, that safeguarding children is a responsibility of every adult in our culture. There's nothing more important than making sure we've created a safe world for our children. And yet, day after day after day, all I hear are experiences of people who've endured these kinds of experiences as children. And for me, this is the one thing that it rattles me, and it's upsetting and it's angering. And frankly, I don't think we as a society respond to this. Our kids don't vote. So we do not often respond to what this is and the ramifications of this in an adequate way in other societal systems, whether that's law enforcement or judicial systems or whatever. This one's sort of a passion project for me.
Your rage is shared by many, many people.
Yeah.
What do you do with that rage?
It's a hard one for me, Kyle. I mean, part of it, I try to speak to groups. I try to work with my clients. This is not your fault. I try to protect every child in my purview, like a fierce mama lion. Every chance I get to do this work, I mean, any of us is just one person, but I guess that is just what governs me. But I think I teach students about it. And one of the things I tell my students year over year at Cal State LA, I say, this is the one time your professor, well, not the one time, but one of the times your professor is going to seem irrational, is I said, I am sorry, but I don't think the penalties are sufficient for people who harm children. And if that makes me sound like some crazed person, and what shocks me year over year, Kyle, is the number of my students who get tearful in that classroom. And over the course of the semester, they come and they tell me, thank you, because this happened to me. And I can't, I mean, it is one of the, even as I'm talking now, my heart's racing. And there are sessions when my clients leave, I cry, and I've got kids. And if anyone ever laid a hand on them, so this one, it gets me going. And I just see so many beautiful souls who let their stories be interrupted. My goal is to uninterrupt those stories for them and let them know it's as beautiful as it always was, and something happened in it, and we've just given you a dragon to slay, but slay it you will.
I find the words that she spoke very powerful, and they do reflect the feelings of many practitioners who work with children and who work with adults affected by coercive control. Many of the adults that we see as clients in gender equality, they were children of coercive control too. And the effect on their life is enormous. And I like her words, interrupted. It is like coercive control interrupts someone's life. It interrupts it and takes it for their own. And part of the healing is to slay the dragon and to take back your life and to look at the interruption, understand the interruption, come to terms with that interruption, and then plan your new life past it. Because no way can the coercive controller continue to interrupt your life, particularly when you start to set boundaries against them. So there's two websites that are quite helpful here, Kids Helpline and Australian Childhood Foundation. They are examples of organisations that have helpful materials for parents to talk with children about their rights, what is acceptable behaviour and abusive, and or what's acceptable behaviour and what is abuse, and what to do about it. Because children really need that education, and it's a constant theme in counselling and research, is that children wish they'd understood more. They wish they'd had more knowledge and understanding, and they start to articulate that as they get older. And then when they're adults, they're actually really able to talk about how they really had no idea what was going on, and that it affected them all the more badly because they didn't understand, they didn't know what it was called, they didn't have a name for any of it, and what's more, they didn't know what to do about it, and they felt like they had to keep it secret. So this is the end of the presentation now, and the 10 weeks of coercive control. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Stay tuned, because coming up in the next week will be very short educational videos and also webinars on coercive control and family violence for different populations. And we will keep you informed about that and let you know what's happening there. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay well. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions or concerns or want to know about anything else. I will be putting up all the references that I've used in this series, and a few other helpful resources as well, so that you can use those too. So stay well, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you soon. Bye-bye for now.